Telesur English. I am Estefanía Bravo in Quito, Ecuador. This is From the South. The number of coronavirus cases around the world has topped 1 million, while the number of confirmed deaths passed 51,000. About 60% of fatalities reported worldwide have come from 4 European countries: Italy, Spain, France, and Britain. Officials from Italy and Spain reported early signs that rates of infection, hospitalization, and death are stabilizing in their nations, though their governments announced a combined total of more than 1,700 new coronavirus-related fatalities on Thursday. The official number of coronavirus cases in Ecuador has passed 3,100, while the number of deaths stands at 120. However, citizens, especially in the hardest hit city of Guayaquil, accuse the government of downplaying the numbers. Our correspondent, Denise Herrera, has more.
According to the government, Ecuador has now 3,163 cases of coronavirus and 120 deaths. This was official information given by the authorities. Recently, the president of Ecuador, Lenin Moreno, announced that he is asking to all the authorities to reveal the truth about the numbers of COVID-19 in the country. This decision came after the complaints made by the citizens from Guayaquil, who are still denouncing that they don't know how to handle this sanitary crisis in the city, as well as the local media that are reporting that these official numbers made by the authorities are not true. To this crisis also, the medical staff in the country have denounced that they don't have the personal protection equipment to face this sanitary crisis. This is the information we have for now. Back to you at the studios.
We thank our correspondent for that report. Meanwhile, Ecuadorian President Lenin Moreno has admitted that official statistics about the number of COVID-19 cases in the country fall short of reality.
Don't minimize the severity of this crisis. I have asked that all information, however painful it may be made public. We have to tell the truth. We are aware that official records fall short regarding COVID-19 cases and deaths. The reality always outgrows the numbers of tests and the speed in which attention is drawn. Other countries have suffered from it, and now it happened to Ecuador, especially in Guayaquil. According to scientists, we have thousands of infections and hundreds of people dead due to the virus, although some cases are reported as a suspicion.
Ecuador has quickly become the worst hit country in the region, yet many agricultural producers, especially from indigenous communities, continue to work to provide for the rest of the country, despite the risk of getting infected. Ecuador's National Indigenous Umbrella Organization, CONAIE, has been coordinating a nationwide response to the crisis.
We don't have such resources as the government, but we have done all that we could to coordinate with all of our organizations, for example, in the Cotopaxi province, where the president of the indigenous movement of Cotopaxi is also implementing a community action plan to help our brothers and sisters living in the cities, and in other provinces as well, from Bolívar to the Ecuadorian coast. And at CONAIE, we are also collaborating with indigenous Machachi organizations in Mejia Canton to create a small food bank where those in most need can request basic food items. Thanks to this collective work, we have managed to help some 200 families in the last few days.
Moving on, yesterday we spoke to Italian sociologist and former head of United Nations Drug Control Agency, Pino Arlacchi, to discuss the United States' provocation and harassment against Venezuela, designating the country as a state sponsoring terrorism and offering a $15 million bounty for President Nicolás Maduro. Here's what he had to say.
The actions against Venezuela by the United States now are very close to a genocide attempt. And I'm very serious saying that. I never used this word. It's an extremely heavy word that must be used. If you sum up all the actions that the USA government is doing since more than 1 year against Venezuela, All of these amount to persecution that is really close to genocide. You cannot block a country on its main source of income. You cannot do a financial blockade that isolates this country from all international transactions. You really cannot destroy its currency. Bolivar has been destroyed by the United States financial mafia through this illegal website called Dollar Today that respond to a group of American financiers and to people that are very close to Wall Street. Bolivar has been destroyed, and hyperinflation damaged heavily the economy of Venezuela. With the complicity of the main American rating agencies that put Venezuela's risk at the same level of Syria, meaning cutting off Venezuela from having a loan on the international market. All of this put together amount to a genocidal attempt. These military provocations will end up with a military invasion. I do not think that, because the military planners and the experts, they said many occasions that would be a defeat, would be wrong, would start as Iraq, they say, and end up like Vietnam. So they know that this will not work, cannot be used, but they are used means that amount to a military invasion. These sanctions against Venezuela are killing people. Tens of thousands of people are killed by the fact that it is impossible to import basic medicine for therapies like diabetes, like many others, because international banks refuse to process the transactions related to even Venezuelans' food and medicine, which should not be included in any sanction. But they do anyway that, because they are afraid of a reaction, of a retaliation by the American Treasury.
More stories coming up, don't go away. Welcome back. More news now. With one more COVID-19 case taking the country's total to 46, the government of Barbados has initiated a 24-hour lockdown to curb the spread of the virus. The announcement was made on Thursday night.
The curfew which we impose on this country is a 24-hour curfew, unless there is legitimate business which will require you to leave your home and to be on the road. You can only be on the road to go to the pharmacy, to seek medical assistance, or if you are part of the essential services, or if you are doing business with any of the businesses which are exempted under this order. Therefore, as of 5 p.m. tomorrow, Friday the 3rd of April, all supermarkets and mini-marts shall remain closed until further notice.
Trinidad and Tobago will be releasing prisoners who fit certain criteria to reduce overcrowding amid the COVID-19 pandemic.
I can tell you that at the remand end, we have looked at non-violent offences, referred to as minor offences particularly, and the number that we've come up with so far from a cross-reference from the prison's data and the court is approximately 149 people.
Jamaica's COVID-19 cases have risen to 44 with 3 deaths, according to the Minister of Health.
Females and 23 males who have been confirmed as having COVID-19 to date. In the meantime, we have 44 persons who are currently in isolation. 24 persons are under quarantine in a government facility. In addition, of course, to the 140 Cuban health professionals who are being quarantined, I think, until this weekend, when they will be allowed to engage the public health system to bolster our frontline defense.
Grenada, which has implemented stay-at-home measures and a curfew from 7 p.m. to 5 a.m., has confirmed 10 cases of the novel coronavirus as of April 1st.
I announced that one more laboratory confirmed case of COVID-19 on mainland Grenada has been diagnosed. This brings the total confirmed cases of COVID-19 to 10. The individual is a 58-year-old male who arrived in Grenada from New York on March 19th. He started experiencing symptoms on March 30th and was tested on March 31st. His symptoms are currently recorded as fever, cough, and general weakness. He is quarantined and being monitored closely. There are 2 other family members in the household, and they too are under quarantine, but are not exhibiting any symptoms of the virus to date.
Brazil's Supreme Court has issued an order to President Jair Bolsonaro to develop a cohesive coronavirus plan in the next 48 hours as the country registers more than 5,700 cases. Our correspondent Brian Muir from Sao Paulo has more.
Last night, the Brazilian government issued its official coronavirus figures, and the number of infections has risen to 5,700. And the death count has risen to 242, with 40% of all infections and deaths concentrated in the urban area of Sao Paulo. It was reported in the Forum magazine that Bolsonaro had a telephone conversation with U.S. President Donald Trump earlier today, and that Trump told him that he has to do something to keep people at home in Brazil. So even Donald Trump, who like Bolsonaro began denying that coronavirus was going to be a serious problem, is now ordering Bolsonaro to get with the program, get with what the rest of the world's doing. As he becomes more and more isolated, as more and more of his own allies jump ship, as the military is holding meetings to see how they can come up with a coronavirus plan despite Bolsonaro, Supreme Court Minister Alexandre de Moraes issued a court order last night requiring President Bolsonaro to present a cohesive anti-coronavirus plan within the next 48 hours.
We thank Brian Muir for that report. Thousands of Army reservists have been put back into service in Peru to help combat the spread of the novel coronavirus. This is the first time in Peru's history that reservists have been called back to the barracks. The decision comes after President Martín Vizcarra declared a nationwide state of emergency and an overnight curfew. Over 1,000 cases of COVID-19 have been confirmed in the country. We're taking one last break, but stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. While many people across the world are complaining about having to stay home due to lockdowns imposed to contain the COVID-19 pandemic, thousands of homeless people in South Africa wish they had a home to stay in during this period. On the 26th of March, a day before a national lockdown went into effect, the government set up temporary shelters to house the homeless. However, these shelters quickly filled to capacity, leaving thousands stranded on the streets where they are vulnerable to the infectious virus.
There by Caledonian, there's people there are people who have TB there, and there are people who ran away because they are coronavirus positive. Now they've already mixed with those people there by the quarantine. Now it's becoming havoc, and the food is not enough there, and it's a problem.
And still in South Africa, riot police raided a church in central Cape Town on Thursday to remove hundreds of migrants that were sheltering there. The migrants had previously refused to leave the church and demanded the South African government help relocate them to other countries after being the victims of xenophobic attacks last year. Reports state riot police broke down the church's doors to remove the migrants who were led onto buses and taken to a temporary camp outside the city. The president of Portugal has extended the state of emergency in the nation for 2 more weeks. Portugal has reported over 9,000 cases of COVID-19 and over 200 deaths.
It has been and will continue to be a radical change in our lives. It has been and will continue to be for a few more weeks. But what matters is to know that this change is worth tens of thousands of lives saved. For those who suffered or suffer from the pandemic, for those who died alone and without a proper farewell, for their families or final invocation of solidarity. We will not forget them, and it is for them and for the millions and millions that we commit ourselves in winning the second stage, allowing for us to win the greatest challenge of all our lives.
Turnout for Mali's parliamentary elections was only 36%, as most voters chose to stay at home due to fears over the coronavirus pandemic and threats of violence. Voters cast their ballots for new members of parliament on Sunday in a long-delayed election that was marred by security concerns. Several violent incidents took place on that day in the nation's north and central regions, including the kidnapping of some officials. Moving on, in the United States, the Democratic National Convention, where the Democratic presidential candidate is being appointed, has been postponed due to the coronavirus crisis. The Democratic National Committee announced that the convention is rescheduling from mid-July to the week of August 17th. The move comes after prospective nominee Joe Biden said he didn't think it was possible to hold a normal convention in July because of the coronavirus. In just 2 weeks, 10 million jobs in the United States have vanished due to the coronavirus crisis. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi announced that she would form a bipartisan House committee to oversee the Trump administration's response to the pandemic. Our correspondent, Jorge Gestoso in Washington, brings us the latest on the situation across the U.S.
Thank you. At 1 p.m. Eastern Time at Port Everglades is scheduled to dock the first of 2 cruise ships that for many, many days were trying to find a place to dock, and they have on board about 200 passengers with symptoms of coronavirus. On the other hand, there is a 6.2 million figure of Americans asking for unemployment that, if you added to the previous figure of 3.3 million of the previous week, we're talking about 10 million Americans unemployed. The situation is critical regarding the coronavirus and pandemic. We're talking that the people with cases of coronavirus went over 210,000. The dead people also overpassed 5,000, and the supplies for medical care are starting to shorten. The person of the president have said yesterday in a press conference that the coming days are going to be horrifying, very, very difficult days, and the Pentagon has already separated 100,000 body bags in anticipation on what could be the days to come. We get back to you now.
That was Jorge Gestoso from Washington, D.C. Meanwhile, China has recommitted to helping Latin American and Caribbean countries, noting that it has sent its first team of medical experts to the region to assist Venezuela in the fight against COVID-19. The team left on March 29th and arrived on March the 30th.
At the request of the Venezuelan government, China has recently dispatched an anti-epidemic medical expert group to Venezuela after taking into account Venezuela's actual anti-epidemic needs. The Chinese expert group will also assist the Venezuelan side in improving its anti-epidemic measures and the level of treatment, and make active efforts to prevent and control the epidemic in Venezuela and even Latin America.
China has slammed U.S. President Donald Trump's assertion that the country has misrepresented its COVID-19 figures. Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hua Qingying said U.S. politicians who accuse Beijing of concealing information are, quote, shameless and without morality.
The actions and behaviors of these American politicians are shameless and without morality. We have said many times that to slander, to discredit, to blame others, or to shift responsibility cannot make up the time that has been lost. Going on into lying will only waste more time and cause more loss of life. China has done its best to be open, transparent, and responsible. Through you, Bloomberg, I want to ask these few politicians in the US. Can you stand up and tell the world what would have happened if the country that first discovered the outbreak was the US rather than China? Would the US handle it better than the Chinese government?
The European Union has pledged to raise up to $109 billion in loans to mitigate the economic impact of the coronavirus crisis in the bloc. The loans should be backed by 25 billion of guarantees committed by member states to the EU budget.
And this is why we introduced today SURE. SURE is Europe-supported, short-time work. It can mitigate the effects of the recession. It keeps people in work. It enables companies to return to the market with renewed vigor. The Commission will provide loans to those member states that need them to strengthen their short-time work schemes.
The EU chief also expressed great concern over a coronavirus emergency law in Hungary that has given far-right Prime Minister Viktor Orbán sweeping powers with no end date.
And I understand that member states may need to take emergency measures to address the immediate health crisis. But I am concerned that certain measures go too far. And I'm particularly concerned with the situation in Hungary.
Thailand has announced a nationwide curfew to curb the spread of the novel coronavirus as the country registers over 1,800 cases.
To enhance the effectiveness in suppressing the pandemic and to decrease the traveling of the Thai population, I will announce a mandate prohibiting people going out of their residences, known as a curfew, from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m., effective all over the kingdom. I will emphasize that I will not let anybody hoard stuff or seize the opportunity to gain profit for themselves, which will further rub salt in the wounds of Thais already hurt from the outbreak.
India's Dharavi slum, one of the biggest ones in the world, has reported its first coronavirus death, raising concerns about the spread of the disease in Mumbai. The 56-year-old man who suffered from a renal condition had no history of foreign travel or coming into close contact with someone who had recently traveled abroad. Between 700,000 and 1 million people are crammed into tiny homes on the 2.1 square kilometer site where Dharavi is located in Mumbai.
There's a positive case in Mumbai's Dharavi and also a reported death. There are 300 flats and 90 shops near the location, and some buildings have been sealed. Samples of family members and other residents of the buildings are being collected, and according to the protocol, we have also initiated the process of contact tracing.
And finally, Ellis Marsalis Jr., jazz pianist, a teacher, and a patriarch of a New Orleans musical clan, has passed away at the age of 85 after battling pneumonia brought on by the new coronavirus. His son confirmed late Wednesday that his father's death was sparked by the virus that is causing the global pandemic. Marsalis was born in New Orleans, son of the operator of a hotel where Marsalis met during black musicians who couldn't stay at the segregated downtown hotels where they performed. He played the saxophone in high school. He also played the piano by the time he went to university. And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And be sure to follow us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Stefania Bravo. Until next time.